An echo thing going on here, though.
Can you hear? There we go. Mine's on.
Okay, yeah, we can hear each other. That's good.
Okay, so...
Oh, right, hold on. I remember to mute one, and I didn't remember to mute the other.
Ah.
Are we on YouTube as well?
Yes, you are.
Our channel?
Yes, you put you on your channel, yep.
Okay. Oh, there it is.
All right. What the heck?
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
This one's on
Yeah.
about.
Tonight, welcome.
That is muted?
Yes, it's muted.
Because it looks like it...
It's muted, honey. Right
Oh,
there.
okay. I see
So,
it.
guys, we're live.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Okay.
didn't want another...
Professionalism.
It's fixed. Let's move on.
Professionalism?
Okay, let's move on. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Christmas episode of, well, the first Christmas episode, I'll get to that in a second, of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am, as always, your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist and the Paranormal Encyclopedia. I'm joined by one of my co-hosts,
Author Brian McKinley, godfather of paranormal vampires.
our friend and co-host, Byron Voltage, is ill this evening, so he is not joining us. Instead,
No.
we're joined
We
by...
wish him well.
Amisha, sidekick?
And you see me on rare occasions. I am the producer of this lovely little entourage. My name is Beth, and I'm the one that herds these cats.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Yeah, she is Cat, the herder of cats.
I told you I needed a better nickname than this.
Yeah, you do. So we thought we've been through a bunch of ideas of what we were going to do tonight, and we decided, and ultimately I decided it's Christmas. We spend 364 days of the year dealing with doom and gloom and demons and witches and all the things out there in the spiritual world that are trying to kill you. So we're gonna lighten it up a bit and talk about some Christmas miracles, some positive things. We're going to talk about a couple of Christmas carols and their origins, things like that. And then next week, we're actually going to do a second part, so you're going to have to listen through a bunch of Christmas-themed stuff twice. But next week, we're actually going to do the nativity story, the story of the birth of Jesus. What'll make this different than every other version that you've probably heard a million times before is I'm going to go to, Luke, and I'm going to go to the Gospels, and I'm going to talk about the actual story of the birth of Christ and how very different it is from what people think. And talk about some of the changes in the historical stuff. Thought this would be an interesting take as opposed to like last year when we had the big talk about the origins of Christmas and why we celebrated on December 25th. And everyone, I think, despite the fact every year somebody, although I'm surprised so far this year I haven't had anybody do it, but usually every year I have somebody post on their Facebook a long list of how Christmas is all pagan and as if it's a big revelation when almost every Christian I know knows this.
Well, to be fair, you only associate with the educated and intelligent ones typically. There are some people who are still ignorant in the dark. That's what those lists are for.
True, but a lot of the ones that are ignorant in the dark don't celebrate Christmas for exactly those reasons. I just had a tiff with a Jehovah's Witness earlier today. They do not celebrate Christmas at all.
Yeah, I don't think they celebrate any holiday.
They don't do any kind of celebration because they're just...
They have one whole... No, they have one holy... They are a cult. But they do have one holy day. Which is the Feast of Christ. Basically, it's Christ's death. And it's a day of great solemnity, not a day of great joy.
Can I just take a moment there to say, you know how in Dogma by Kevin Smith...
Absolutely adore that movie.
Where it's, your people don't celebrate your faith, you mourn it.
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses clearly take it one step further, folks. And we're going to avoid them like the plague.
Let me clarify one thing, because I don't like to rag on anybody's beliefs, whatever I think of them. I have lots of doctrinal issues with Jehovah's Witnesses, but the one thing, and I don't want to go down this road too much, because again, this is supposed to be a positive episode. Everybody talks about the Catholic Church protecting pedophiles. Look up the Australian Royal Commission cases that have been going on against the Jehovah's Witnesses. They've got a decades-long history of protecting pedophiles. And that don't fly with me. I don't care if you're Catholic. I don't care if you're witness. It's not an acceptable form of behavior.
No. I think we can all agree with
Yeah.
that.
But So on to something more positive. Positive in this is going to be Kevin's Christmas rant, and I think this may even be a yearly tradition. Which is to all of my fellow Christians out there, because you're the only ones who do this, who are upset about the whole happy holidays. Get over yourselves. There are, between November and January, 14 separate religious festivals.
Minimum.
Yeah. That's the only list I found. I'm quite certain there are more.
Actually, the last update where it's like, the reason we say happy holidays nowadays isn't just to, not separate from, like, people who are Jewish or anything like that. It's because there are some, in the winter months, there's over 28 or more different celebrations that are going from various regions. Even in Japan, even if it's not fully Christmas, there's always been around that time of year a Shinto tradition for a cake because it's about the time of renewal. Yeah,
because the end of it's the beginning of winter. It's the shortest winter solstice, shortest night of the year. Things are going to start. It's the ending of the night's getting short. It's the beginning of the day is getting long. It's a time to celebrate. But also, aside from that, and the fact that, let's keep in mind, from a Christian perspective, because some of them think, all of that's evil, pagan idolatry, which is a whole other thing to get into on a day we're not being positive. But Judaism, Jesus Christ was a Jew. Read your Bibles, folks. He was a Jewish boy. Hanukkah is this time of year. Why disrespect the faith that our Messiah was born into? For that matter, there are other Christian holidays this time of year. It's largely forgotten in the U.S., but there's Three Kings Day. There's, for that matter,
all the different saint days.
All the different saint days, yes. St. Nicholas's feast day.
Yeah, because they didn't have actual calendars at the time. They remembered about the saints.
For that matter, January 6th or January 7th, which would be Orthodox Christmas.
Yeah, my mom's birthday every year.
Yeah. Not for nothing, folks. I was doing research on this because of the previously mentioned argument with the Jehovah's Witness. Ethiopian Orthodox and Coptic, a.k.a. Egyptian Orthodox, which are the two oldest surviving forms of Christianity in the world. They are both so old. They both are so old and started in two separate areas. We don't even know which one's the oldest. Both of them celebrate on January 7th. And here's the most fundamental point about why I don't think Christians should get offended by happy holidays. The origin of holiday is holy day. Why do you find it offensive for someone to call Christmas a holy day? That's not an insult to your faith. Nor is calling the other, and for the non-Christians out there, it's not an insult to your faith to call your holiday a holy day either. And for the atheists and agnostics, you guys should just convert because we have the best holidays.
Excuse you.
We get to have,
I meant theists as a whole, not just Christians.
we get to have fun on them anyway without believing.
Yeah, but it's still our holiday. Cultural appreciation. I'm obviously joking here.
About to say,
For Pete's sake.
I can go get the riding crop.
Don't tempt me. For Pete's sakes, in all seriousness, I don't mean that anybody should convert. I was watching a very good video, and I'll give the guy a shout out. Atheist YouTuber I happen to like, Vice Rhino, did a video on the war on Christmas, and the fact that as an atheist, he sets up a nativity scene. He loves putting the lights on his house. Why? No, he doesn't like putting putting the lights up, but he loves how his kids' eyes light up. He loves how the neighbors' kids' eyes light up. Christmas is a day for sharing and for community and for a sense of love and joy. And let's not muck this up by getting petty, which I think is a nice segue into a pair of the first two stories, one of which I'm going to tell, which is lead into one that Amisha is going to tell, which is one of the favorite of ours. So, my story happened in Austria in, 1818. With a little... So, in this town of Austria, in Oben, and forgive me for the fact that I'm about to mispronounce this, Obendorf, Austria, which was part of the Austrian Empire. It was on the Alzach River. and it is still present. What is present-day Austria? A young priest by the name of Joseph Murr, who had come there the year before. Now, back in 1816, he had written the lyrics to what he called "Stille Nacht" in another town, and he had a problem. There had been a bunch of flooding in the area recently, and the church's organ had been destroyed. So he went to Franz Xavier Gruber, who was an organist in the nearby village of Arnsdorf. Before Christmas Eve, Moore had brought him the words to Gruber and asked him to compose a melody and a guitar accompaniment for Christmas Eve Mass. Because of the river flooding, that's why it was a guitar instead of an organ. It's unknown what inspired the original lyrics, but ladies and gentlemen, this is where we get one of the most beloved Christmas carols of all time, Silent Night. The music was created out of it's Christmas Eve, and we don't have it. We don't have an organ to play carols on.
No, we're not that lucky, or at least have a recording of it.
Yeah, but this does bring us to something that would happen 20 years later.
Yeah. So, around 1913, in political things are happening. A lot of gossiping, a lot of alliances from country to country, and a lot of people having an issue with being a part of one sovereignty or another, and a whole bunch of things, all leading up to a assassination attempt that went pretty funnily wrong. In that they didn't time their attack right and accidentally hit the guards just behind him. But on his way to visit said guards in the hospital, the driver took a wrong turn, happened to be passing by one of the assassins, and he just shot him. I forget what was his name?
Archduke Ferdinand.
Yes.
Archduke Ferdinand. Of
Austria, no less.
So Austria is kind of upset about this. Yes, they blame it. I believe it was Syria.
Yeah.
Syria for this. Syria goes.
Honey, get the Christmas story.
All right.
They don't need the history of World War One. That wasn't the idea here.
I was going to say you're taking the long way around to get to this story.
Okay, skipping ahead.
I was
1914, a few days before Christmas, some of the
Serbia,
opposing.
honey, not Syria.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, hey, some of the hold on, and some of the troops start hearing "Still Not." Not. And they realize that I know the song. I don't know the words they are saying, but I know the song. And they started going along with it. Some playing whatever instruments they had, like harmonicas or anything, or just singing. And this led to what was known as the Christmas truce, which is kind of a misnomer because there wasn't one singular truce. This happened several places across the border, or individually. And this inspired my favorite Christmas movie of all time, Joyous Noel, about the depending on which one you're looking at, days or up to a month. Where the French, British, Scottish, and German soldiers...
And Belgian.
And all stopped fighting. And it was initially to trade prisoners, bury the dead, and all sorts of other stuff. But they realized, we can't start fighting again on Christmas.
It's Christmas.
So they started exchanging stories, exchanging pictures, playing football,
Christmas gifts.
They were doing all these things, and all of a sudden they realized, No, I was just playing football with that guy. He told me the story about his mother. I can't go back to trying to kill him.
Yeah, because the thing is, that whole the reason why they call it the truce was it was essentially an unofficial ceasefire overall after the initial prisoner trading and whatnot because typically wars did not go into frickin' winter.
Yeah.
Rules of war were you fight in summer, you rest in winter. Thank you, Merlin. Where yes, I went there. And so because of this, the way that it just dragged on, and the thing is they just got comfortable not actually fearing for their lives every day.
Yeah.
They didn't have to stay in the trenches covered in lace and everything. They could actually go and walk about.
And trench warfare was horrible.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it was that entire thing was a hot mess in and of itself.
Yeah.
And they actually reference it in Blackadder one time when it's like, do you remember? Because they're reminiscing. It's in the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking about they thought the war was finally over because it was the longest time they had gone before or since without firing a single shot, anybody dying on either side, and it was right before the big push. And even though Blackadder is alternative history,
They still...
it was still, you could feel the emotion there, especially when they come up over the top and the way they're reminiscing about and how they actually miss those days when things were relatively normal, even in a surreal as hell instance like that.
And as logical as the reasons for it are, keep in mind, folks, they tried to repeat this truce in 1915 and in the following years of the war. They couldn't do it.
No, there was a soft no from the higher-ups in 1915 and then a hard no in 1916.
They stopped the war to end all wars for an upwards of a month in parts of Europe because people didn't want to kill each other anymore.
And it was basically independently done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
just by the soldiers.
There was some
Which-
degree of agreement as I understand it, there was a degree of agreement among the brass for a brief truce for Christmas Eve, just by virtue of it was Christmas Eve. But that would have been, okay, in the morning you go back to shooting each other. Not for as long as it went on, not for the soccer games that went on, not for the gifts that went on. There's the story of the one German soldier who collected buttons, and the English soldier took a pair of scissors, and because the German soldier didn't have them yet, cut them off his uniform and handed them to him. Giving each other tobacco, giving each other food from the various mail order.
Because you don't want
Things that were get
camaraderie
sent.
about enemies. And the thing is, if that was allowed to continue, or at least if
Yeah.
they continued that tradition, I honestly think that some of the casualties could have been severely reduced.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, if you go into a warfare situation, cutting off all of humanity, and dorky as it is of me to say it, so they kind of point this out in Gundam Wing and even in Star Trek, that if you just essentially mechanicalize everything and take all humanity out of it, it becomes pointless and just unnecessary destruction. If there's not something that
Which,
you feel is safe.
unfortunately, some of their strategies were kind of that. The absolute horrible way some of the strategies were done. And, I've been told that British strategy was mostly just keep throwing lines and lines of soldiers at it.
Yeah, Zap Browning.
And basically, and forgetting that they have machine guns.
Well, no, the machine guns actually had a habit of overheating and jamming on a lot of things. The Russian version actually had a way that you could actually cool it down. And they used whatever was on hand, literally whatever was on hand to do so, as far as liquids were concerned. But theirs was actually able to cool down, but they still couldn't get past the jamming problem when it got developed later.
Yeah, which, just to backtrack a little bit here, there is a reason why I was going a little bit into the history of what caused the war, because it's the fact that this happened on many different and individual fronts, and so you got to wonder, how was it that easy? Basically, nobody was that invested in the war. It was all political superpowers. There's moving people around.
And outdated alliances
Yeah.
that never got redrawn, which is the problem. especially with
Overgrown
all-
empires that needed...
So the people
this
had...
is the end of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. This is the end of the Ottoman Empire.
Bing, 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 bing,
Yeah.
bing, bing,
Yeah.
bing. Everybody gets activated at once, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah.
And basically, there was no investment from the soldiers themselves to keep fighting the war. trench warfare, aside from being incredibly hard to do, sending lines and lines of people, to gain centimeters.
Well, even back then, because World War I was when tanks were introduced.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They only used tanks to go across.
Oh boy!
What? Oh Lord!
I disappeared
That would be
for
Chris.
1 week.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm like, oh crap.
Oh, I knew that voice.
Hi, I thought you were sick.
I still am, in case you haven't heard from the voice.
It's a little gravelier than usual.
Yeah, just a
But
bit.
then again, with you, we weren't sure if that was your voice or just theatrics.
Kind of keeping in with topic, because I noticed you guys are kind of straying just a teensy bit away from Christmas and a little bit more into war.
Well, they're getting into politics, which I want to put a cap on right now.
Good, because I'm here. Pardon. Well, let's kind of cite a number of little bits of history, in particular during warfare, whenever Christmas was expressed, not necessarily within politics themselves, but generally the nature of individuals. A couple of things I would love to offer some slight correction on, if I may.
Aside from the fact that we messed up the country.
Yes, Serbia, not Syria. About a good 4,000 miles south.
Yeah.
You gotta admit, it's like mostly one letter off.
It's still a very different country.
It is a very
That's
different
like
country,
confusing
but
Iraq and
it's like
Iran.
trying to remember name.
Yeah. Although I will say, there's still the in terms of Christmas warfare, there's still one of my favorite stories of war on Christmas, which is the original American beer run.
Oh,
We'll
yeah.
do that in a second. Let
Yes.
Chris and
But
Susan
Chris,
talk
go
about
ahead.
the voice.
I was going to tell that one, but
Um,
if you have something to add, please.
Well, that is definitely a good one. I'm suddenly reminded of how, yes, Christmas spirit was certainly embraced during the holidays of World War One, at least in the early parts, and we hear that wonderful story of the ceasefire. But then I'm reminded also of another point in history where it was exploited. Tet. Does anybody remember that?
I mean,
Not
Vietnam.
from,
Yes, during Vietnam.
I'm not as good with Vietnam history.
yeah, and the only reason I really know the story is, again, it's my favorite Christmas movie is
And I'll point
Joyous
out,
Noel.
we are trying to side on the positive side tonight, so let's not get too depressing.
Oh no, not at all. It's more to the tune of it all depends upon the nature of individuals at any given point in time, regardless of what region they are from, intent that they have. It is always within the spirit of every single holiday, in which case everyone will choose to either embrace, rebuke, or exploit. You notice I get philosophical when I'm sick?
Yeah, you're often philosophical, though.
About to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, philosophical is like your default nature.
Default nature is philosophical. Good. Glad to hear that. I think that, in all honesty, whenever it comes to expression of the holidays throughout the world, the one thing that it will always be universal is the strength of the human spirit, the human condition, and the human intent. World War I was a fine example. Unfortunately, it did not really repeat into other wars.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I remember some expressions of the holiday spirit when I was in the sandbox. And I'm sure any of our other listeners, same bit. But I could certainly state that it will always endure.
Yeah, but no, I was actually trying to say it kind of had a perfect soup for
Right
happening.
place, right time, right point in history.
Yeah, because as I said, none of the soldiers were invested in the war. Here, it was all this political stuff. They didn't really care, so it was much easier for them to talk to people and express themselves and share stories.
So
Well, World War One. I'm sorry, Kevin. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was just about to do the beer run, but if you have something
Beer
left,
Run is better than what I was going to add.
so one of the great stories of American history is, of course, and quite local for us since we're here in New Jersey and near Trenton, would be the Battle of Trenton. So this is December 26th, 1776. Now, up until this point, the Americans had been getting their rear ends handed to them by the British. We lost battle after battle. In fairness, actually, Washington's strategy was to keep losing, and it was a good. And despite how it sounds,
He kept retreating and
Yeah.
drawing their lines out.
he was drawing their lines out. He was drawing their supply lines in particular out.
Yeah.
He was winning a war by attrition, just by making it costly and difficult for the British and the German and the Prussians and all the other groups that were hired by the British to fight. Now here's the problem, though. So the main way, because America was a fledgling country at this point, they didn't really have currency. The main way that they paid their soldiers was in beer.
Beers and IOUs.
Yes. The problem with this philosophy is that the main source of beer for the colonies at this point is Benjamin Franklin. Now, Ben was allergic to hops, so his beer didn't use hops, and everybody hated it. So a plan was made, largely not by Washington himself, but by Washington's generals and lieutenants and officers, to attack the Hessian soldiers in New Jersey, because Germans got good beer. On
Damn
Christmas Eve, they crossed the river. Traditionally, and if you go to Washington Crossing Park in Pennsylvania, there's a big painting of it. It's Washington standing on the front of the boat and heroically rowing across the river.
But he wasn't even involved.
Yeah, he basically woke up about halfway through the crossing
Going,
and went, "What?"
like, okay, boys,
You're
that's
doing
no.
what?
This is worse than
imagine
Hamilton.
why.
There's
when
also
he did his-
actually some
Saying, wait, what beer?
some
What?
debate over whether they actually took boats or they just walked across the ice. The Delaware River is
Yeah.
not particularly deep.
No, it's not. Not in
Now,
places.
where it gets funny, and actually in there, I grew up near where they crossed. It's not very deep there, not at all. Now, a British royalist farmer on the New Jersey side saw the lights of the crossing, rushed to the garrison to warn the commander. The commander, who was drunk and eating his fill, wouldn't even see the man. He thought the idea that the Americans would attack on Christmas was absolutely ridiculous, which is why it wound up being a bloodless victory. And a major, decisive, important victory, a victory that helped convince the French to throw in on our side, started out as a beer run.
Yep.
Only in America.
My sister actually tried Ben Franklin's recipe, and she said, yeah, beer making was not one of his talents. Granted, he was basically colonial era Iron Man.
Yes.
Well, I mean, if you really think about it, non-hop beer is very much like skim milk, and I'm taking the Ron Swanson approach here. Non-hops beer is like skim milk. Skim milk is a liar. It's water pretending to be milk.
There's a little bit left.
So there's another story I particularly wanted to tell, although it's not technically a Christmas story. It's a Christian story, and it's pretty close because this happened on New Year's, or just
Did it
before
take place
New
in
just after
Homie
New Year's.
Plaza?
No.
Then I don't want to hear it.
I like the way you're thinking.
So I
Should do that
can't
as a movie
speak
night.
for everyone, but aside from Amazing Grace, which I do love, one of my favorite other Christian songs and hymns would be Amazing Grace. So Amazing Grace was written by an Anglican priest by the name of John Newton, based on his experiences in 1748. Now, here's what I find fascinating about Amazing Grace. It's widely thought of now as like an African spiritual song. You hear a lot of African American gospel singers singing and things like that. The man who wrote it was deeply involved in the slave trade. What happened is in 1748 he was on a ship that got caught in a really severe storm and that nearly got sank to the bottom of the ocean. In that moment of absolute terror, he a man who had up to this point largely been an atheist. He didn't. I mean, reading his comments, he didn't think much of God. He wasn't a religious man. He didn't go to church. He called out to God for help, and obviously the ship was spared. From that moment, he swore off of gambling. He swore off of drinking. He swore off of profanity. He would continue.
What do you do? My wife naked?
And then he was ordained in 1754, and he began to start writing hymns with the poet William Cowper, and including Amazing Grace, which was written for a sermon on New Year's Day, 1773. We don't know if there was any music with it originally. It may very well have been that the congregation simply chanted the words. He did later in life. I mean, at this point, he was still making. He had left the slave trade, but he was still giving money. He was still invested in the slave trade, so he was still involved in it. But later in his life, he actually did go on to become an abolitionist, and did realize how horrible a mistake he had made. But even when he had, after his conversion, as he started to interact with the tribal people of Africa, he started realizing they deserved better treatment than they got, and he started changing. And Amisha said, and I happen to agree with her when I was telling her the story on the car ride over, it's slightly better of a story than because a lot of people popularly tell the story as poof, instant conversion, and he immediately forsook slavery. But it's a little more believable of this reality that it's a slow dawning realization of how horrible and misspent his life was.
Well, not just believable, but also relatable.
Yeah.
It's much easier for somebody to make a grand change over time than be like, boop, never again, never again.
Well, to be fair, I can understand why people would tell the story as an instant switch, especially because who would mostly they be telling this story to? Kids.
Yes.
Kids are used to, especially with the main storyline that we give them, because they like that instant gratification in their stories, and they don't appreciate the slow burn until they're about teenage or so.
You're absolutely right, Beth. I agree 100%.
It's a better story for kids, and that's who they would have been telling the story to for any of that sort of history.
Okay, there's more to get into, but before we do that, because we forgot at the beginning of the show, we should talk about Audible.
Yes.
And I do want to give out the number in case anybody wants to call in and share Christmas experiences or anything else for that matter.
Call in.
Aside from Chris, who of course is still here and is welcome to stay as long as his voice holds out. So, folks, if you're like the rest of us, and I think most of our listeners in general, you like to read, but a common problem for many people, myself included, is time. You've got to work, you got to drive places, you got all these things going on, especially right now because it's the holidays. Audiobooks are a good solution to that problem of, well, how do I read when I don't have the time to sit down and flip through a book? Listen to you can get Audible, which is the program we're talking about, on your phone. Listen to it on the way to work. Listen on the way home. Listen to it in those minutes of the day where you can't sit and read a book, but you can listen to something instead of the radio. Audible has hundreds of thousands of titles, fiction, nonfiction. You've got some of our previous guests are on there. For example, Carrie Vaughn, the author of the Kitty Norville books who we just had on. All of the Kitty Norville books are on there. All of Dacre Stoker's 2 books, both Dracula and Dracula the Undead, the sequel and the prequel to Dracula, are on there.
And Dracula, probably.
Dracula's certainly on there.
Yeah, it's always on there. It's on everything. It's as a freebie.
Yeah. All of Brian's books are on there.
Yeah.
There are nonfiction books, and I'll save Baron the trouble, given he's having a voice problem. Even Anne Rice's books are on there.
Yeah.
That's your Christmas present from Kevin, apparently.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, Baron. I did it for you.
Yeah, some of the other books are on there. Personally, I would recommend anything by S.J. Scott. Some of Kevin Smith's books are on there, narrated by him, and he'll do commentary. There's a lot of great books.
It's an experience to listen to a book read by its actual author.
And if you're somebody who has issues with being able to transfer from one to the other, that's perfectly fine. I'm sure Audible's going to have a way soon to, if you're in the middle of reading a book, have a version of it in Audible so that you can just jump between.
That makes some sense.
Yeah,
Hopefully they are.
I would hope so, because that's the only way I would be able to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can jump around with chapters, but if you're looking for a specific page, I think they're not quite there yet.
But even being able to just go chapter by chapter does make it easier to switch back between the two.
This way you can just pick back up, and that's perfectly
Yeah.
fine. But once that's a little more fine-tuned and
Yeah.
synced to where you're at, then
Yeah.
we'll talk.
Yeah.
But at any rate,
But
go to the
that's-
link in the description. That's audibletrial.com/paranormale, audibletrial.com/paranormale. You get a free month's membership and a free audiobook. If you cancel the membership, do it 29 days. On the 30th day cancel, you don't have to pay. You get to keep the audiobook. Or you can, keep going, and they'll appreciate that. We'll appreciate that. They've got a lot of good plans, a lot of books. It's a great option. Also, if anyone would like to call in to share a Christmas story, or for that matter, again, just because we're doing a topic on the show doesn't mean you have to call in about the topic. If you got some burning thing you need to ask or want to ask, go ahead. 609-807-2492. 609-807-2492. That's the number. You can call in. Even with Baron on the phone, we can handle multiple callers. I think our current record is 3.
I think that's what we had.
No, I think we had 4.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Did we? Okay.
Something like that.
You want to talk about burning Christmas stories?
Burning Christmas stories?
Yeah, that
You said burning
sounds like
Christmas
a
stories.
terrible segue.
Did I
It sounds like an awesome joke story. Tell us. Tell us.
The first time I was electrocuted.
Oh, on Christmas?
Oh, God. That's when it
It
happened?
was setting up a Christmas tree.
Oh, good Lord, man.
God's above, dude.
Yeah. We learned the smell of ozone, putting together the Christmas lights, and realized that those lovely little brown connectors that you usually put onto an outlet to plug multiple plugs in, they do age, and they don't age well.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
So my hand accidentally touched one of the prongs for said plug while it was going into the said outlet. And our tree got knocked over
Oh,
because
God.
I flew backward at age 9.
The hell, dude?
Wow.
Okay, Baron's not allowed to play with electricity. New rule for the studio.
No, he's just not allowed to play with the plugs. He can play with whatever else he wants, as long as there's no liquids around it.
Now you know why I'm afraid of exposed wiring
Fair enough.
I would be.
and electrical. Oh, the funny thing is that the next year is when I realized that the sockets and electric lights, old ones, still have a charge to them, even if there's no light bulb in it. The silence. speaks
Simultaneous
for itself.
face palm by Beth and I.
I'm face palming over here. I am Picard palming at you, sir. I am Picard palming, I am Spock palming, Riker palming, and you know what? It's even happened on occasion. I am Kirk palming at you, sir.
So,
You're welcome. Merry Christmas. You guys get to roast me.
It sounds like that already
Chris
happened.
Nuts,
When I come
that
back
roasting
next
on an
week,
open
your
fire.
eggs are all mine.
That just sounds like bad fireplay, but that's just me.
Yeah, I was kind of going in that deliberately in that direction. I think
got
I broke
that?
Beth.
We got
We got her
it.
to snort.
Frame.
So,
Ah,
it wouldn't be a proper Christmas episode without talking a little bit about the man himself, the reason for the season. Jesus, I'm kidding, Santa Claus. I totally mean Santa Claus. Specifically, I thought I talked
Sandy Claus.
After Sandy Claus.
a little bit about.
Well, what have you?
Yes, please.
Oh, I'm really scared.
Now, if only your voice wasn't damaged.
Yeah,
You sounded pretty good.
Oh, I can sing that perfectly.
but
Oh, I'm sure.
But before we get into anything copyrighted,
So long as it's under 10 seconds, we're good.
Brandon, I mean, we're okay with her singing "Silent Night" because that's way too old to be copyrighted.
Well, yeah, that's
Public domain.
thank you.
Yep.
Disney will find a way.
But I was going to say, specifically, I mean the story, a little bit of the story of Saint Nicholas of Myra, who is a really interesting character, aside from being one of several inspirations for Santa Claus. Yes, there was a real Saint Nicholas. He was in Turkey.
strangely enough.
There are
All
two
that coffee made his cheeks all rosy.
stories of the man I find absolutely fascinating. One is probably apocryphal. Actually, they're both realistically probably apocryphal. But one is the inspiration for his aspect of Santa Claus. The other one is a story about the heretic known as Arius. So when when all of the bishops were brought together for the Council of Nicaea, the one that codified the Bible and started to codify Christian thought, St. Nicholas was one of the bishops that came. Another one of the bishops was a man by the name of Arius. Arius provoked what was the great debate of the Council of Nicaea, which was Jesus Christ one with God the Father, as most Christians today believe, or was he a lesser God in service to God the Father? Arius argued passionately that Jesus and God the Father were not the same being. That one was, the Son was the Son, a created being, a God of great importance, but not Yahweh. There was ultimately a vote of the 218 bishops present. 216 said that Arius was wrong, and one other one agreed with him. But the story where Nicholas gets involved is, the legend goes that he punched Arius in the face.
Heated religious debate.
Yeah, in a rather robust defense of his argument. Now, the story is probably better known for happened on Christmas Eve back in Turkey. Again, story goes that there was a man in Mira that was destitute and was basically the point of considering selling both of his daughters into sexual slavery. Legend has it that he walked by the house and took a bag of gold and threw it through a window or sometimes down the chimney, which is extremely unlikely. But it was enough money that the man was able to pay his bills, his debtors, and didn't have to sell his daughters into slavery, which is why, aside from being patron saint of children, St. Nicholas is also the patron saint of prostitutes. Wrap your heads around that one for a moment.
Actually, what's funny is kind of similar vein of like how two completely non-related things somehow came together under one deity.
Yeah.
In Japan, there is the deity Inari, who Inari, lovingly enough, is actually a gender-neutral name, because Inari has either appeared as an older gentleman with a bag of rice or as a beautiful young woman. Now, Inari initially was the god of the rice fields, as well as foxes, which protected everybody from the northeast, which is where the essentially the Hellmouth direction was, for lack of a better term, because brain vocabulary is dead.
And Yomi, most likely, which would be the Shinto underworld.
Yomi is the underworld. There's actually a specific demon gate for hell itself, which Yomi simply means underworld.
True, but it's not a very nice underworld.
So kind of
depends on where you're at.
Granted.
But as I
so
was
kind of similar to Hades.
As I was getting to though, and however, over time, as more developed areas started rising up, a lot of the outskirt areas, which were farmlands, as they were starting to get developed and whatnot, started to become for the lower districts, where was essentially the red light district. So he eventually, over time, as well as being the god of the fields, of rice in particular, and of course sake, that's Tanuki, but it's a similar shared area. But he also became the god of prostitutes as well.
But let's see actually, this is not a Christmas story, but this is again in the theme of positive religious themed stories to offset talking about death, demons, and hell all of the time. I'm going to tell the story.
I'm talking about Guardians. I didn't say
I know.
that,
Well, no, I was going to say no. I was leading into my next story. I wasn't commenting on your story. No, I really wasn't. I'm going to tell the story of my favorite saint.
I'm busting your butt.
I know.
Relax.
So, my favorite saint is actually the patron saint of the 20th century. It's a man by the name of Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe was a Belgian priest. Or excuse me, correction, a Polish priest serving in Poland during the Second World War. He and his order took in 4,000 refugees and hid them from the Nazis. Half of those people were Jews. The Nazis caught them, dragged them to the concentration camps, including, of course, Kolbe. Kolbe wound up in Auschwitz. But during his time there, he started driving the Germans crazy by preaching to those in the camp that wanted to hear him, doing mass for them, and then there becomes a problem. One of the men in his barracks escapes. The Nazis had a rule: if one prisoner escaped, 10 men were chosen at random and shot to death. As this happens, one of the men who was chosen to be shot starts screaming about his wife. Franzik Gajanowicz cried out, "My wife, my children." Kolbe stands up and says, "Take me instead, I'm just a worthless old priest." And he really drove the Germans crazy, because the first thing they decided to do was take the 10 men and starve them to death. For the next month, in his prison cell, Kolbe led the prisoners in prayer. Every time the guards checked on him, he was standing or kneeling in the middle of the cell, looking calmly at those who entered. After they had been starved and deprived of water for 2 weeks, he was the only one still alive. The guards wanted the bunker emptied, so they gave him a lethal injection of carbonic acid. He is said to have raised his left arm calmly and waited for the deadly injection. He died on August 14th, and his remains were cremated on the 15th, the feast day of the Assumption of Mary. On May 12th of 1955, Kolbe was recognized by the Vatican as a servant of God. He was declared venerable by Pope John VI. And on January 30th, 1969, he was beatified as a confessor of the faith by the same Pope. And then in 1971, he was canonized as a saint by Pope John Paul II. When he was canonized, the man whose life he saved was there. He and his family survived the war.
Now, this is a much nicer story than the other story I'm thinking of, where for some reason Nazis got shoehorned in.
Let's not go there. It's not even history. It's a retelling of a ballet. But the Nutcracker, version of the Nutcracker where the rats are Nazis.
I mean,
No, we're not. Let's
What?
Not go, let's go there. Not go there, please.
I'm not going to go there, but where would I be able to find this?
It's called Nutcracker 3 in 3D or Nutcracker: The Untold Story.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
Fair enough.
And this way, any of our viewers can go search for it themselves, so they also have never heard of this thing. I am now curious.
If you want to go hurt your brains, because
Though, funny story about the Nutcracker, there's 3 famous ballets Tchaikovsky composed. There is the Nutcracker, there's Swan Lake, and Sleeping Beauty.
You're forgetting the fourth. You're forgetting the fourth.
Yeah, well, these 3 I always point to because there's a particular hilarity with each of them. The hilarity with Swan Lake is that when it first came out, it was absolutely hated.
For a very good reason, if anybody's read the book.
Yeah, people were saying it was going to be its first and last showing ever, and it's by far the most famous ballet in the that's well known.
It's one of Tchaikovsky's most famous pieces as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Second would be Sleeping Beauty, which was a passion project of his, and surprisingly, kind of a little obscure. The music is best known for the one that Disney produced, because they used his compositions and added lyrics to it. The third one, and which is where this relates, is Nutcracker. Nutcracker was written for a paycheck. He absolutely detested writing the Nutcracker, and yet it is by far his most popular piece.
Happens a lot.
Well, especially when it's something that's supposed to be geared, to a particular audience. Clearly, Nutcracker was not meant for adults by any stretch.
Nope.
Well, it's kind of interesting because
Was the fourth one you're missing the Toy Soldier?
No, I was thinking Fantasia, a.k.a. Nutcracker 2 Electric Boogaloo, but go on.
yeah, but I was going to say, although what's funny is how some of the music in Sleeping Beauty was repurposed. That ominous, sweet music that led Aurora up to the spinning wheel. That's a comedy cat ballet. That's a cat dancing around to that music.
There are two more stories I want to tell since we're running out of time. One is, it's both quite recent. The first one's a story from 2008. I got getting these stories from top10s.net. Their list of 10 Christmas miracles. So the first one happened to a kid, Marco Dutschak, in Austria. He had a cyst along his back that basically crushed his spine. Doctors said, never going to walk again. Week or so before Christmas, he decided to get out of bed and go for a walk. And to give you an idea of how bizarre that is, no, it's not something anybody else has done before.
Or since.
Should have ruined his spine and got up and walked.
Did he continue walking or just the one time?
Doesn't say.
Oh.
The other one I find quite interesting, woman happened in Colorado, 2009. It's a woman by the name of Tracy Hermanstorfer. She's admitted to the hospital pregnant. Things go south fast. She becomes unresponsive, quickly stops breathing. Doctors can't revive her. They try to save the baby. Baby arrives stillborn. Here's where it gets crazy. They managed to revive the baby, which is impressive enough, given the baby was born stillborn, brought them back to life. Mm-hmm. And then, not long after the baby got revived, Tracy started breathing again. She went 4 minutes without brain activity or breathing.
How were her
or
vitals
blood
afterwards?
pressure. Full recovery.
Okay, that is actually very impressive considering it's
that's
4
legitimate.
minutes to when brain damage actually starts.
Yeah.
To begin with, though, as you were telling this, up until you got to the part of Tracy survived, I'm sitting there, as he's saying this story, I'm sitting there going, this reminds me of the very terrible apocalyptic movie known as The Seventh Sign.
Oh, that movie.
Yeah, no, I was like, what the hell am I watching? This is 10 kinds of retarded. No.
With Demi Moore as the woman in question, no less.
Well, no.
Yeah, another thing I can make Kevin cringe at.
But we're starting to... Sadly, folks, we are starting to wrap up. We need to plug our other sponsor.
Oh, you want paper?
Yes.
Would you like me to read it?
Sure.
Can you do it from memory? Since we got it, Gene. Don't worry
I
about it.
certainly do.
Go for it.
I got it.
We're good. Don't worry about it.
We're gonna
Take
let
it away,
we're gonna
Baron.
Let the Baron do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we all come across a time whenever we wish to have anonymity, whenever we are browsing through the internet and come across a society in which case we wish to keep our privacy close and near and dear to us. Well, NordVPN is there to help. They provide a service to be able to have your browsing completely and totally safe, anonymous, and with minimal hassle. They come and going rates, varying plans, and I can tell you this much. Military-grade encryption that cannot be busted. I seriously suggest you go through it because you know what? I use it. It's fun, especially when you're posting to bulletin boards and want people to think that you're posting from one country when you're posting to another. And this certainly comes in handy if you're in a country that purposely limits your internet browsing capabilities. I
China.
strongly suggest you check it out.
Cough,
They
cough,
certainly
cough,
hooked me up, and I'm sure they can hook you up too. Try it out now at nordvpn.com.
Or the link in the description if you want to help us out.
Yes.
Exactly.
But yeah, remember next week we'll be doing the Christmas story, with the original Christmas story, not the movie.
Not my favorite movie.
I was about to say.
My favorite.
Is it your favorite?
My favorite Christmas movie. Yeah.
Yep.
A Christmas.
See,
Story.
my brother will sit and just watch it over and over and over again.
Yeah, Christmas-
That one day a year.
It's a tradition.
I have two favorite Christmas movies. One is Care Bears Nutcracker. Fight me, everybody.
Round one.
Fight.
The other was actually something that we've had for years and years, back on VHS. And I'm not even going to explain how old it makes me feel to actually have to specify that. It was the Precious Moments Christmas episode, where it was about an hour or so long, and you're following this angel Timmy as he has to bring the halo to the Savior, who was just being born, and his adventures trying to get to the end. And it's very, very
I'm gonna have to
touching.
check that out. It sounds cute.
It is adorable. It's very endearing, and it's not really overly. It's you're following an angel around doing a job, and he is tiny and cute. And if I remember correctly, he's kind of like Linus. He has his own little like special blanket, and he lost what he was supposed to give him, so he gives him his blanket instead.
Aww.
Reminds me of a favorite Christmas book of mine, which is very short. I picked it up in Barnes & Noble one year just before Christmas. Just after Christmas, actually. We were doing shopping for a white elephant party, and neither of us had got any gifts we wanted to give away, so we went and bought things. But it's a book called Cosmic Christmas, and it's a retelling of the Christmas story from the perspective of the Archangel Gabriel. And the battle to bring the basically Gabriel being given the job of bringing the Savior to Mary, and Satan and his armies trying to stop him.
Yeah. Backtracking a little bit, I was going to say, Christmas Story is one of those movies where I get why it's good, I get why people like it. For some reason, I can only get into a few scenes, but otherwise which is one of the scenes I can get into. With his mom and the teacher and during kid weird.
Yeah.
I will say I enjoy A Christmas Story. My two favorites, to go very cheesy, yes, I'm a fan of It's a Wonderful Life.
Eh.
Yeah.
I
And
can appreciate that.
ever since that's when I was a teenager, but ever since I was a little kid, my favorite Christmas movie is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Bumbles bounce.
Yukon Cornelius
I have a
just
few favorite
bugged
Christmas
me as a
movies
kid.
of mine that I watch
Yeah,
at least
I was
once
gonna
every
say
Christmas.
What's yours? Oh, wait, I know what yours is.
Although somebody
Die
pointed...
Hard
Yep.
and Lethal Weapon.
Yeah.
We've been over this.
Hey, another great...
Gremlins!
Yeah,
Gremlins.
Gremlins is a great Christmas movie. Another great Christmas movie that's also a Halloween movie.
Although-
Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yes, yes. Though I was going to say, I just remembered a quote somebody said about Christmas Story, and it's kind of true when you stop and think about it, that America has this great fascination with absolutely destroying a Christmas Story.
Damn right.
Yeah, we kind
Yeah.
of do.
I mean, just look up at the live show at some point.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And the sequel, which was
Oh,
And the
terrible.
sequel.
see, I don't want to even think about those.
Nope. Not
don't
even on
speak
bad
of that.
movie night.
Yeah.
There's not enough booze you can play me.
And if I understand correctly, the live show is based off the fact that it went to Broadway.
And there's also the one holiday thing that we will not speak of. Do not say its name. The shirt that I'm wearing is the old...
Christmas.
What? Yeah, no,
The
no.
Wookiee Christmas.
Yes.
Ewok Christmas.
Ewok Christmas would be better than Star Wars Holiday Special.
Yeah.
Ladies
Life
and gentlemen,
Day.
if you haven't seen it,
Happy
Life
Happy
Day.
Life Day.
save the brain cells. Do not watch the Star Wars Holiday Special.
I think
This
they
is the man
need
who actively
to.
hates
It is
Ewoks, by the
actually
way,
a rite
everybody.
of passage.
I don't hate Ewoks.
That movie is hilarious.
I find it more hilarious
It's
to think
painful, agonizing.
how obvious it is that Carrie
Yeah,
Fisher
I
is
know.
just high as a kite.
That's what's hilarious.
We need to wrap things up. Yes. Remember to tune in next week. Again, Christmas Story. Ladies and gentlemen, all joking aside and fun and games aside, from all of us here at Paranormal Encyclopedia and at Hamilton Radio, I do want to say Merry Christmas, Happy belated Hanukkah since it's now over, Joyous Kwanzaa,
Happy Yule.
Happy Yule, Happy Solstice,
And same.
Merry Festivus for the rest of you heathens.
Yep.
Happy New Year if you don't celebrate it. And for anyone that feels left out, Happy Holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
This is Kevin Mears, the Paranormal Encyclopedia, saying have a good night. God bless. Happy holidays.
I don't really have a sign off because it's been.
So say good night. Say something.
Say goodnight, Anisha.
Good night, Amisha.
Have a nice Brian, keep your fangs sharp.
And of course, your lovely producer Beth. Live long and prosper, everybody.
And Chris, since you're on the line.
And this is Baron Voltage saying, avoid lightning rods, especially near Christmas trees.
Very nice.
Good night, gang. We'll see you next week.
What's up? Guys are still going. Guys are still going.